Hello, dear listener, and welcome to the Gestalten podcast. My name is Martin Groschwald, and after we have come back last time from our very well-deserved summer break, I am now very, very happy to welcome you to an episode where I have to admit I wasn't an expert on. I mean, I'm not personally a very deep expert about car design per se. I know the industry, a fair bit, but we are now talking a little bit about bicycles, and we're talking about, what bicycles will be in the future, how they will be part of the future of mobility, and especially about the cities, what kind of specialty they have in terms of designing, what a designer needs to know, and about the potential future position of a professional bike designer. And with me for this discussion is Torgny Fjeldskaar, and he has been the design director for 5 years with BMC Switzerland, which is one of the biggest road bike manufacturers in the world. And he started an internal design department there from absolute scratch, built a team around it. And the interesting part with him is that he also has experience in the car industry, was at BMW and Mazda for a few years. So he will be able to help us to understand a little bit the differences as well. So I hope you will enjoy this episode. It's something a little bit different, but we wanted to mix it up a little bit. So yeah, enjoy this recording. And also not to forget, the recording is presented by Concept House Innovation Consultancy. Check out the new website at www.concepthouse-ic.com. Go and check it out. Let us know what you think. And let's go with Torgny and myself. Enjoy. Torgny Fjeldskaar, welcome to the Gestalten podcast, and it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Martin.
Lovely. So this is we want to talk about a topic today, going away a little bit from the traditional only cars and what kind of role of cars play into this new age of mobility, and we want to talk a little bit about two-wheel obstacles, so two-wheel vehicles today, as you have quite a bit of experience on both the two-wheel and the four-wheel side. But before we get too much into detail in this kind of thing, let's go a little bit into what's happening at the moment, because with all this corona pandemic, without going into too much detail into the reasons for that and stuff like that, but we see a massive increase of the usage of motorbikes, of bicycles, of electric bikes, and everything that is nowadays connected with it, such as these electric city scooters and all these kind of thing. How has your life changed as a majorly two-wheel designer over the past months? You mentioned beforehand that you have been very, very busy recently, but what has changed for you since this pandemic has taken over all of our lives?
Yeah, well, business is good because there's a lot of demand for bicycles at the moment, right? And electric bikes. So it has definitely affected the global market.
Do you think from what you have seen personally and your personal experience over the last, let's say, 5 years, that this corona pandemic has even more accelerated the usage of these electric bikes or bicycles and everything that's surrounded by it? Or has this actually started earlier? Or how could you explain this kind of increase on these two-wheelers?
Well, I think there's two big reasons that you see in big cities right now. And one of them is that people are encouraged not to take public transport. So that's part of what's driving it. And another thing is all these temporary bike lanes and the infrastructure that's in place in cities like London and Paris, and it just makes people feel a lot safer, where you take part of the space that's allocated normally for cars, and you allocate that for bicycles. So if that remains permanent, then we'll see a large permanent shift. But there's no guarantee for that.
How how do you believe that the mobility will continue to change with that? I mean, let's play this little game and this little exercise. I mean, we've all had these conversations before. We believe that the cities will be less polluted with emissions. It will be much cleaner place from that regard. How will this have or what kind of effect will this have on alternative methods of getting from A to B, such as with the bikes? I mean, we saw already over the past few years that there was a very strong, design emphasis coming into the bike area. Has also to do with the materials, of course, being used. But what's the kind of biggest influence of this kind of new generation that's now coming through, and these new these new ways of doing things that will affect in terms of what your job is, which is designing two-wheel vehicles in those regards? What's what you see, where's your inspiration, where the effects coming from that will decide in terms of how a bike will maybe look like in the next few years?
Well, I think you need to split bikes into what they're being used for. There's commuter bikes, and that's a very, very big segment with many sub-segments. And then you obviously still have the more sports-oriented bikes, and they could sort of develop in very different ways, right? The commuter bikes, I mean, I think the biggest shift in the last few years has been towards a lot more cargo bikes, where they can actually replace someone's car or the second car maybe for the family, where you can bring kids or groceries or things like that. And that's really, still very much at the beginning. If you look at them, there were lots of cargo bikes back in the 1920s and 1930s, and they didn't look that different from the ones you see today. So there was a sort of a full stop, 60, 70 years where nothing happened. And with the introduction of the electric assist, it should become a much more viable option for a lot more people, because it's quite heavy to ride around on something that weighs 30, 40 kilos plus whatever you carry.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned, obviously, the electric, let's say, motors or whatever we want to call them, assists, whatever they are. How have they changed your way of designing? I mean, you've seen, you were at BMW, you were at Mazda, you were at BMW during a time where BMW i was very big, where there was a lot of focus on electric vehicles. And now we have, with a little bit of a delay, this kind of focus on electricity also in bicycles, of course. So what has changed? Like, what was the main challenge for you in terms of designing then the bicycles, but also what have you learned from maybe your time at BMW of, maybe mistakes or positive things that have been done that you then implemented into the new bicycles?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think the electric bikes, it really started taking off like 10 years ago. And Bosch came in as a main player and removed many of the obstacles that were associated with electric bikes before that. Things like service and making it easy for bike dealers to just send it. Nobody can repair an electric bike, so you would have to be able to send it somewhere. And Bosch really revolutionized that. I think it's specifically from BMW. I mean, I got tons of inspiration. I learned tons of things there, but as it relates to electric bikes, I just think that we're a bit at the beginning there as well. If you look at the car, when the car was new and 140 years ago or whatever, it took many years before the car. It was just a horse carriage with an engine, right? And that was very much the case for bicycles in the beginning, the early years of the electric bike as well. And it took many years before the car found its own shape. And that will take some time for the electric bike as well. There's been some improvements, but overall, I think there's still quite some way to go.
What you mentioned is very interesting. What's the biggest challenge for you of designing an electric bike compared to, let's say, a normal muscle-powered bicycle? And where do you draw similarities from what you have done with the car industry, for example, and where would you also see this is where it's fundamentally different? What's your analysis of that kind of process of designing a product?
Well, compared to regular bikes, I mean, you're dealing with very different proportions, right? And you can start the project with saying, do you want it to look as much as possible like a regular bike? Or do you sort of accept that this is a completely new vehicle category and we need to move away from what we know as bicycles today? And what you see on the component side and wheels and everything is that you have more and more specifically developed parts and components for e-bikes, which is good because then it's easier to keep everything in proportion. Everything is going to be beefed up a little bit, and I think also in form language there's no reason that it needs to look like the same old diamond frame that we've had on bicycles for 100 years now. Right?
And how are these companies? I mean, I think if we look back a little bit, you've been at BMC, which is, one of the best, I think, mountain bike companies. That's what they're best known for in that sense. So
more road bikes.
Road bikes. Sorry.
Yeah.
And if you come in as a designer, and what is the acceptance of a creative spirit where it says like, look, we need to do something which is not just about aerodynamics, which is not just about lightweight, of course, especially for road bikes, about stability, about the materials, but we also need to make it attractive without just being in graphics. I mean, this is what a lot of people oftentimes think. I think it's just like, oh yeah, that's graphic heavy and all these kind of things. So on your first day at BMC, how did you attack that? How did you speak to all your colleagues around and make it clear to them how important design can be for the future of the company?
Yeah, that was a very special opportunity because there was no in-house design before that. So the CEO hired me, and he wanted me to report directly to him and build a new design department. And so I got to hire my own team. I got to develop a design strategy and implement this over 5 years. So I spent 5 years there, and then I think in the beginning it was a big challenge because you're going to take some of the decisions that were made by other people, like product managers and engineers, were no longer they were going to be on my side, and it's hard for people to accept. I think that would, if I put myself in their shoes, then I would probably have a similar reaction. So I knew from day one that wasn't going to be, a walk in the park. But I think like after, say, 2 years, when we started having our products out in the market, that were radically changed, both, pretty much everything. But they were well received, and if you have a couple of products that are selling well, there's a lot less discussion and there's a lot less questioning the new strategy, right? But for a while there, it's not very easy.
For you as a creative, what were parts of these obstacles, if you're allowed to share them?
Well, if you come in and your task is to change the design direction, well, then some people are not going to like that because they've done things in certain ways over the past few years, and it's sort of an indirect criticism in changing everything. So not everyone's going to like that, and I think that's a natural reaction. It doesn't surprise me, and as I said, maybe I would have had a similar reaction myself. It's hard for people to embrace change, and I think as far as the design team goes, I was lucky to have the chance to sort of build my own team from scratch, because then at least you have internally there's not going to be any resistance. They are on board with the new project. They embrace everything new because they haven't been part of the past. So, But there's having said that, I think in all bicycle companies, there's always a bit of interest of conflict between engineers and designers. And I think the successful companies, they are good at sort of dealing with that constant conflict in a fruitful way, because you really need both, right?
Of course, and I think, I mean, you mentioned one important thing is you were allowed to build a team. I think, when was it, 2014? I think is when you started there. You were allowed to build a team. You had the support of a CEO who understood that, let's say, an in-house design team is probably what's best for the company at this given time. Do you think that's now a standard? Is that something that the bike industry or like two-wheeler industry generally still does, or is that still the exception from the rule? Because we have seen, obviously, in the 60s and 70s in the car industry, with more in the 80s and 90s, then tending towards, let's say, internal teams, which are still very predominant over here. But especially in the product world, or in the world where the products are a little bit less complex than a car, it oftentimes still tends to be pushed out. I mean, is this something that you see as being reduced in the bike industry, or do you think it's still the standard, or where do you see the future go towards this, especially having in mind, obviously, with future of mobility, that branding and services are becoming more and more important?
Well, I think most of the bigger brands, they have their own in-house design teams now, quite big teams actually, as well. So that's pretty much become the standard. But at least on performance-driven bikes, the marketing story is still very much built on numbers, and this is 10% stiffer, 8% lighter, and 20% more aerodynamic than the predecessor. That's the marketing story. So you don't want to blur that with giving design too much attention. So design and industrial design and graphic design is very much in the you're playing second fiddle, and which is okay. I think what they can learn from the car industry is that design is very new still in the bicycle industry. Up until 15, 20 years ago, there was no industrial design. There was round tubes and graphic design. So it was all engineers and graphics. So, in terms of processes and in terms of maturity of decision making and how we go about design, it's still pretty immature in our industry, and there we can learn a lot from the automotive industry.
Yeah. What do you think is going to be the future when it comes to this grander scheme of mobility in general? And we're talking a lot at the moment about subscriptions. We're talking about what is the future of mobility in the sense of how is it being consumed? Is it with buying? Is it with renting? Is it subscription services and all these kind of things? Will we see something like this in a larger scale in the future as well? I mean, Munich quite a bit. If I go to the main train station here, I could rent a very basic bike and get from A to B. It's pretty much part of the system now. But is the bike industry actually thinking about this even further, and just to say, okay, maybe we can professionalize this, or maybe we can make products that fit this kind of system? Or is it more like, look, we're so specialized, and we're working on these Tour de France bikes, so like the ultra performance high level, that we're not looking too much into that as well?
They already are, and there's some of the biggest companies in the bicycle industry now are bike sharing companies that nobody's heard about. And so in some places you would see electric bikes being part of the rental bike scheme. In most places it's just a regular bike. I see it continuing in the future towards more electric bikes, because there's so many people in the bigger cities who just need a little bit of assistance. That you don't want to arrive sweaty at work, and maybe it's a hilly city like Barcelona or whatever. It can really be very useful. So it's already there. I think what's not been very well developed is service schemes and it's a bit like those small electric scooters that you see, that are being thrown around big cities now, and not always very well taken care of. So we've seen a bit of the same in many big cities with the bicycles as well, rental bikes.
I wanna ask you a question when it comes a little bit to e-bikes, because I find this a very interesting development that we have there. And I have to say something up front. I'm not a very big motorcycle guy. Like, I have a bicycle, of course, at home. I like, riding that from time to time over the weekends and stuff like that. But for you as a designer, and if we take it a little bit further, that the motorbikes are becoming electric, of course, as well. We saw, BMW motorcycles doing a number of concepts on this as well over the past few years. Where do we draw the line on, from an e-bike, which, an electric bicycle, to a electric motorcycle? And I'm not just talking about speed. I understand, of course, this is a lot of people will say, yeah, the one thing is faster, but at what point do you say, okay, there is a clear difference in how you use it, maybe where you can park it and all these kind of things as well, because that will have a massive effect on the design as well, and what, will be perceived as an e-bike or a electric motorcycle.
Yeah, I think you draw the line in the riding position is one major difference. If you have to be able to pedal an electric bicycle, you have a radically different. You need a radically different riding position, and you need the saddle height to be adjustable. Whereas a electric motorbike, you can just have the saddle at one height. It doesn't matter. You don't need to have different sizes and different lengths of the distances between the handlebar and the saddle is always the same. So that's very different when you have to pedal it. So they can get closer to each other, and I think they already are. So somehow getting closer, but yeah, they will. That's one main difference that will keep them apart.
And do you think there's this kind of, let's call it an entry level drug, which can start with a with an electric an e-bicycle in those regards, like almost like these low riders. You have the handcrafted low riding bicycles with where you almost lie on them, and that's almost like the entry level drug to get into like the Harley Davidson customization and all these kind of things. Do you think you will see this more and more, and will, of course, the electric the electric bicycle will also see this kind of customization? I don't want to say craziness, but like, this customization interest as the old bicycle, like the standard bicycles have. And examples would be California and all these kind of things, where you can have like literally your own bicycle.
Yeah, no, I definitely think we'll see more and more of that. But I think in most places the bicycle doesn't have that status, still, so that it's not like you're going to go and ride your bike around and really impress people. So I think there's still a cultural sort of obstacle there that will take some years to overcome, especially in countries where the bicycle, just for, it's not long ago, let's say, take a country like China, that it was, everybody and his dog had a bicycle to get to work, and they've started buying cars pretty recently. So, certain countries have sort of come beyond that, and the bicycle is sort of gaining status again. But it's far from being something that you would, park outside a restaurant like you would park a Lamborghini or something, right?
Well, obviously, I mean, there are Lamborghinis of bicycles as well. So, we don't, we have the luxury bikes in all capacities, of course, road bikes, you can say commuter bikes, you can say about, mountain bikes, electric bikes. Like there is all the time this kind of luxury part of it as well, as we have it with the cars as well. But what you mentioned something very interesting, and a few weeks ago I had a conversation with Alain Launay. He's the head of design for Renault in India, and we were talking about designing on a budget. And he said, look, if you go for these markets like India, you have to play by certain kind of rules. You have to understand how your customer group works, like what the people want, and so on and so on. How do you design a bike? Do you design it for specific areas? Do you design it for a specific target group, or do you say, like, look, we need to understand that in India, for example, it's used in a different way than maybe in Europe or in the US or in China? Like, where does this direction come from the product team or from the marketing team to make this kind of decision, and then for you to adapt to this decision and to understand how this culture is using the bike?
Well, that input, mainly comes from the product manager, who's gathering information from the markets, from sales, from marketing, service, and things like that. And it's a very regionally driven product. The kind of bicycles you would have in Switzerland is not the same as in Holland, even if they're both wealthy, well-developed Western countries. And up until recently in the US, for instance, nobody would ride a bicycle without doing exercise. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't ride to work wearing jeans. Very, very few people would do that. And this is changing now. But you then see that the regional differences are developing as well. And but it's not the designer's task to sort of find out what's going on in this market versus that market.
Yeah. So you get the briefing, and then you're based on the briefing. You do the project pretty much in that sense.
Yeah, and having said that, you do have a lot more influence on what the product is going to be than in car design, for instance. Part of the reason is that you can't really make the split between exterior design and interior design on a bicycle. You're involved in how the product is being used and ergonomics, and the whole user scenario is much more part of what you're dealing with than, say, on exterior design on a car, right?
It's very interesting because I constantly have conversations with people, and we're talking more and more about this idea of experience, and that it's not just about the product, it's much more than that as well. How do you see that in your function within bicycle design in particular, that this, let's call it UX for the sake of that everybody understands what we really want to talk about. But is UX becoming more and more important in terms of what we do? Is it more important in the sense of digital content, like little GPS systems and all these kind of things that will be part of the bikes in the future? Or how do you see these new influences being part of what you do on an every single day basis?
Well, initially when the e-bike came around, you would have these like big displays, and they became bigger and bigger. And now there's more a trend towards reducing that and going a bit back to what is actually necessary. And then everybody's carrying a phone anyway. So if you need additional information, you might as well get it from there. So that's clearly the trend to sort of simplify things again, which I think is good, because one of the fundamental differences between car design and of the approach to car design and the approach to bicycle design is in bicycles it's always been less is more, and if you can reduce the number of elements, the number of welds, the number of components, and the weight, and all of that is seen as really good. Whereas car design and overall, looking at the last few decades, it's been sort of a downward spiral in terms of adding more and more. So just to simplify, and maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but bicycle design is really less is more, and car design has become more is more. So more is more. So you add more features, and you see what the competition is doing, offering. You need to have the same amount of features, plus maybe a couple of more, so that you have the upper hand. And then you add to that the ungainly proportions of many new cars, that you sort of need to have more styling features to kind of cover all that surface and all the bulk that they have, right? And Yeah, we can talk for hours about the reasons for this, but I mean, the approach is very, very different. And if you were to sort of fight for some of the things we would fight for at BMW to get, maybe another chrome part here because it would look more expensive. And if you started adding things like that on a bicycle, nobody would want it. It's a very, very different approach to thinking.
Do you think, okay, so like if we take this a little bit further and we take this idea of styling in general, yeah, so I personally draw very much a line between styling and design, yeah, because design, what you have just said now, is very much about optimization. It's about getting the best out of a product, and this what the definition of the best is always then down to the company, whereas styling is about the best aesthetics in that kind of sense, in a very simply way spoken, of course. Do you think that the bike industry, due to the boom that it is now, and becoming also a lifestyle object, will get more styling in its process, especially when we have commuter bikes, when we have city bikes, these kind of things that are supposed to look cool, for example?
Mm. Oh yeah. You already see it, and I'm not saying that's a positive trend. I think it's kind of necessary, but it's still a world apart from what the bicycle industry is doing and the car industry is doing. So if we go somewhat a bit more in that direction, I think that wouldn't hurt, and put a bit more emphasis on styling and design. Because I think it's important for the customer. I think a lot of customers appreciate it more than bicycle companies admit or are willing to realize. But I think for me it's a bit. Does it have what you're doing? Does it have any substance? Is it purely adding sort of decorative elements, or can you sort of combine it with the structure so that it's somewhat, you can justify it with a form follows function argument.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Because you've seen both now, yeah. So you've seen the bicycle process and how a bicycle is being conceived. You've seen the process of a car as well. Where would you love the bicycle design industry to learn something from the car industry, and of course vice versa? And where do you think the collaboration between these two processes should be closer, just to learn from each other?
Well, I think car design could, I touched on it already. Car design could, I think the overall sort of approach to product development, not just the design side of it, but could, I think, benefit a bit from that kind of thinking that we have in the bicycle industry, that you're not adding. You have to really think twice before you add stuff. I mean, you look at all these like light catches and sort of ornamental designs that you see in the car industry today. But you also look at the weight aspect of it. You keep adding stuff that obviously is going to affect you on the scales. And a new car seat, that with all the electric motors and in a modern premium car can weigh maybe 70 kilos each. And if you go to a lightweight option from Recaro or something like that, it could be like 5 kilos. So already there, you could, you could save so much weight, but you can also, reduce a bit it's so excessive. Do we really need electric motors to open the trunk? It's good to have. It's nice to have, but I mean, at some point we need to start to make some sacrifices in order to create better products overall. And we can't just say, I want that and that and that and that and that, and then expect that it's possible to design, green products, light products. Many of the cars that are enjoyable to drive are enjoyable not because they're luxury cars, but because they're light and just fun, easy. Handling is good, easy to drive. There's lots of examples of that, and I think the overall approach in the car industry would benefit a bit from going back to that. What they kind of used to have.
Do you believe that's a problem about education as well? Do you believe that the car designer maybe nowadays doesn't think as much as I don't want to say the bike designer in general, because I think the community of specific bike designers is still very small because it's a relatively new profession. But let's say industrial designers.
Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, I don't think the designers are to blame in this sort of downward spiral that I'm referring to. I think it's the overall planning of the product. If you say, you're going to give it these proportions and you're going to give it all these features, and it's not always that the designers can really influence that in car design. And what I wanted to say about the bicycle industry and the bicycle design, what we can learn many things from car design. I mean, I was in car design a total of 5 years, so I have a lot more experience in bicycle design for sure, and I don't consider myself an expert on car design at all, compared to some of my ex-colleagues who are superstars. But what we can learn from them is, I think, first of all, to take design, the status of design within the company is much higher in the car industry. The importance of it's much more recognized how much value the end customer puts on design. So that would be a starting point for what we can learn. And in terms of sophistication and proportions and surfacing and all that, we have made good improvements over the last 5 to 10 years in our industry, but we're still, the car industry is light years ahead. But I think the most important aspect is maybe on the recruiting and how the car industry have always been very good at capturing kids' dreams, with all these cool concept cars and sketches that you see all over the internet. And, if we want the next generation of creative talent to dream about designing bicycles instead of supercars, we need to change, pretty radically our approach in our industry, and understanding that it's not only about numbers, it's about capturing dreams, it's about putting on a show, it's about, creating a bit more of a aspirational visual looks, I think.
And the opportunities are there, I think, nowadays. If we look a little bit ahead, 2021, there will be the Munich Motor Show, but obviously they're building that towards the mobility experience. I think this is what they have said. And so there are these opportunities now coming ahead. And obviously you have this in China as well. You have CES in Las Vegas, of course, as well, which are mainly about mobility as a whole, or the connectivity that comes with it, of course. The opportunity is there. So what do you think, the companies are being held back by? Is it just that they don't necessarily see this coolness factor will have an effect on the company as well as the product? Do they, because I obviously I know a concept car costs millions and millions to make, and the effort that goes in there, but you could technically, for comparable price, for relatively little money, do a really, really cool bike concept, for example, and then just present it. What's your reasoning for that this is not happening at the moment?
It is happening. I've been involved in a few of those, and it's always very interesting. But the general acceptance from the hardcore bicycle rider, who's been riding a bike for 20 years or 30 years, is very low towards those concepts. They're going to point out, what, I don't think that tire clearance is really, no, that's not going to work. You know what I mean? It's like they keep it at a very detailed level of critique. So, but I think for the general audience out there, the vast majority of people who know nothing about bicycles, I think it can be a great thing to do, because you can, if I always say that if a bicycle looks if my dad can tell that this is something special, this is something different, then then you've really gone to the. If he doesn't really care about design or bicycles at all, or car for that matter. But if he can tell the difference, and that kind of audience can tell the difference, then at least you have reached outside of your regular bicycle blogs and bicycle magazines.
Social media is probably helping with that. I mean, you see, even the car blogs and all these ones, they're more and more feature these motorcycles nowadays. And I think, there is an opportunity there, not just for the creativity for younger students, especially from these, let's say, transportation design facilities and faculties that have all these talent in there, to show something, and also show something to the bike world, that there's new kids thinking about it. And at the moment, it seems it's, compared obviously to the car industry, but also to the motorcycle industry, there's very, very few people who think about what bicycles could be in the future. Is that also the observation that you have, or do you see more and more students being interested in it, or what's your observation?
I think you do see some students who are interested in this. Not many, but compared to car design. But I think that that this is something we can influence from within the industry by posting more of the design process and development process. It's about, like, for me, what a cool car sketch does to you is that it inspires someone who, if you see the end product, you have no clue how that's done. If you see a sketch, you can think, hey, I could do that. Like, I want to practice. I want to learn how to do that. So I think that's a great thing with hand sketches, is that you can sort of inspire people to want to do the same, and make people think that this is actually achievable. It's not just a crazy cool end product that you see and you don't understand the process of what goes into it. So I think, obviously it's not 100% correct that the sketch goes into production and all that. We all know that myth, but it's a myth that helps inspire people, and for that, I think it serves a great purpose.
And considering the fact, and what let's say the car industry in particular is moving towards, that it's going to be more and more difficult, I think, for young students to push their way through and find an entry point into the car industry. I mean, we have a fantastic opportunity here, and I think what you are just mentioning is, like, we're just at the beginning of the growth of the bicycles, and probably also the motorbikes and these scooters in the future. So there is, and there will be, opportunity for these creative minds that maybe don't go into the car industry but do something else, such as bikes, to really be successful.
Yeah. I think the schools have a great opportunity there. That has not really been, as far as I know, there's nowhere where you can study bicycle design yet. But maybe a good way to start is to just have a module, optional module of a couple of months or something, that people could sort of dive into it. But those are already then people who are they've decided to study something else, maybe car design, because they like cars. And the chances that they will change their mind during their career, while they're studying, it maybe won't be that high. But if you could start to create something similar to what's going on in the car industry, that young kids, six-year-olds, would start to dream about designing bicycles, then I think that's pretty far out there, but that's where we have to, or what we have to aim for. It's not done overnight. It's not an easy task, but that's the, because if people are in their 20s and just see that, I think that there's opportunities now in another industry because it's really booming. You could question that motivation for doing it. It's not like it's been their biggest passion. And I think we need people who are talented and very passionate to really drive the whole industry forward.
Do companies like BMC and others in the in the bike industry work with the, with let's say transportation design universities or, industrial design universities to find these people and to kind of interest them as well? Or is that a something that is lacking at the moment or has not been done before?
It is being done. It is being done. And yeah, I've been involved in as a mentor for a few of those projects, and I know Canyon are doing it all the time with students from Pforzheim and other places. But it still remains a bit of like a, if you pitch a school about this, there will be maybe one or two students of them. If they have 100 students, there will be one or two who are interested in this. So yeah, I think it's could also be an option to establish something outside of the regular transportation design courses, because many of those are studying transportation designs because they love cars.
Yeah, agree. But I know that we have a lot of student listeners to the podcast as well. So, but I want to thank you for talking about this, because I see a lot of young kids coming up to us like, oh, I'm looking for opportunities here and there, and there's a lot of them that like motorcycles as well. And I think this kind of two-wheel design, maybe one should go into this kind of direction. I'm not quite sure what the final solution would be for the best option there, but I think there is enough there, and I think it's a little bit of a mix of like what's available, like are the companies going with that as well, because we can't really expect all the universities just to build a course on it. It would be great if they could, but we all know that there's a lot of money involved in this, and I think it has to be a mix of the educational process as well as from the industry to say like, this is what we would like to do, and we would like to push this together to have the best possible result. I think it goes in both hands, and obviously I know you're an advocate of doing something like this, and everyone helps, and everyone who's interested in that, and everybody who's interested of pushing this, of course, helps to bring this new generation to life, of course, as well. All right. So, first of all, thank you very much for taking the time and spending 45 minutes with me on a topic that I do have to say I have not been very familiar with. Like, obviously it's this kind of normal thing. Everybody knows what a bike is, but like, the complexity that goes into that nowadays is becoming astonishing, to be fair. And it's certainly nothing as simple as a lot of people think. So thank you very much for enlightening us on a lot of these topics. But before I let you go, and we do this with every guest we have on the podcast, you will get 3 questions from me. 2 of them have nothing to do with car design, transportation design whatsoever. You can answer this on however you want, and one of them will be a car question. So I apologize for that, but maybe we can bend the rules a little bit here, and you can also name a bicycle or motorbike or whatever. I'll give you the options here. I'll try to give you the options. All right. So Tony, first question for you: which project would you have absolutely loved to be part of that you didn't?
It can be like in any industry, anything, right? Yeah. I think one project and one product that I admire a lot is the original Vespa. It's 70 years old, and you talk about like iconic designs. I think the word is being used a bit too much these days, but that's a true icon. And if you look at how they, Enrico Piaggio had his business. He'd been making aircraft and stuff, and then saw this opportunity because not everybody could afford cars at the time, to make this new mobility solution for, and they threw sort of all convention out the window, and it was a very radical change to what motorbikes were before that. And it was like this easy entry and kind of structural protective, sheet metal, and you had the engine like on one side of the wheel, with sort of a direct connection without the chain, and you had a spare wheel on the other side, which came in very handy in those days with the rough roads. And then you had the front suspension, which was single-sided, came off of the aircraft, so it made it very easy to change the wheels and everything. I think that is one incredibly well thought out design that has lasted for many years, and it's just so unique. And the mods made it a cultural phenomenon in the 60s, and it's gone way beyond just being a product, right? It has a different status over the years. But that's I would have loved to be part of the team doing those brainstormings, and how radically they sort of changed everything about motorbike design.
Great. All right. Number 2. Which designer, and this is a designer that either you have or you have not worked with, this is completely up to you, had the biggest influence on you and your career?
Only one.
You can mention a couple as well. I'm completely open.
Yeah, right, okay. Then I will. I think the first one that maybe had the biggest impact on me was, I studied mechanical engineering first before I went into design. And then when I studied transportation design in Barcelona, there was one guy that I studied with, Juan Sanz Molina. He was just such an artist, and he would he taught me sort of how to. I saw that what he was doing was he threw rational thinking out the window when he was sketching. So he would come up with shapes and crazy stuff that, what has he been smoking? Everybody was just astonished by the sort of capacity to come up with new shapes and new forms. They made no sense for the most part, but it was always a good starting point, to have something very, very interesting looking. And then that really taught me a lot. And then later on in the career, I think, starting at Cannondale, there was not that many to learn from. At Mazda, I had great colleagues to learn from and get inspired by. Chris Bangle, I went to a workshop with him. He really changed my way of thinking as well. Anders Warming at BMW, who was so good at focusing in on the details and then zooming out on the big picture, history and the market, and he did that constantly, zooming in and out, and it's a technique I'm using a lot myself to this day. And a couple of the other people at BMW, I think, what surprised me was how down to earth and humble and caring they were about their colleagues. And you would expect to come into this very competitive environment. And then you have people like Christopher Weil and Peri Vasselvog and a few others that they would really care about the young people and the interns and sort of make everybody feel a bit less thrown to the sharks, right? And I thought that was something that was very inspiring. That people who could be, world-class designers and still the way they go about things in a human way was very inspiring to me. Because it's all about making the team work, right? It's not just getting good design.
Yeah, exactly. And in complex projects such as cars or everything that is around that, I mean, the teamwork is key. It's not just about one person. I think you have to have that social skill as well. Otherwise, there's only very limited success in not having a team. From my personal experience, but let's not dive too deep into that, because that's a whole nother story we could open up here. Last but certainly not least, if I give you a blank check, and here comes the car question, which car would you buy?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I would buy a bunch of cheap cars. So some of my favorite cars are not very expensive. Citroën CX, I think it's and the original C4 Coupe from BMW. It's a kind of as sculptures, I admire them because they're like the perfect blend of harmony and disharmony. There's a little bit of disharmony that makes it, just interesting. I would go for a Saab 99 Turbo, a McLaren F1 as a bit more expensive. But if it boils down to one car, I would probably go for BMW E46 M3. The CSL version of that is, like, to me, kind of the pinnacle of cars as we used to know them.
Lovely. Nothing more to add on that one. And any kind of mention of a McLaren F1 is always appreciated, because that car is just extremely cool, in my opinion. But all right, Tony, thank you very much. Much appreciated all your time that you have spent with us.
Thanks for having me
this afternoon. We will obviously link you into the show notes so that people can find you on LinkedIn. and get in contact with you if they have any kind of questions or if they would like to do some stuff with you. So that will certainly happen. And to all of our listeners, thank you once again for joining us on the Gestalten podcast. My name was Martin Groschwald. And please do not forget, as always, to follow us on the social media channels to always be up to date with the latest episodes. And of course, if you do listen to us on Apple Podcasts, please do give us a 5-star rating, push us up with us a little bit. And if you have any rating systems on the other channels that you're listening to, pump them up as much as you can. We do appreciate it very, very much from you. But until next time, we will have another very, pretty cool cast. I'm very excited about these, upcoming 5-10 episodes that we're planning right now. But Tony, thank you very much to all our listeners. Thanks very much for listening, and you will hear back from us very soon. Take care.